Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters Podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. My guest on the podcast today is Joe Hassell. Joe completed 31 years in the fire and rescue service, having served in both Essex and Devon Somerset. He has a really extensive level of experience at all kind of levels of command, really. He finished as a Deputy Chief Fire Officer. He's done a lot of work with the NFCC. He's instructed all over the world in all sorts of stuff. But really our conversation today, I suppose, delves into some of the work he did at his postgraduate for collaborative transformation. We're going to talk a lot about change today. We're going to talk about change for the individual. We're going to talk about change for the organisation. We're going to talk about change for the sector, which will really be helpful for those thinking about moving into different positions, moving into new promotions. Opportunities is that term for us. And it's probably one of the really first true, honest accounts that you might hear about some of the things you might be worried about. What are the potential downsides? What are the risks? What are the scary bits? What are the bits no one tells you? What challenges might you face? We share a lot of favourite books and reflections on personal development in here as well. That may aid you in your journey of developing yourself, your team, and also things you could apply to your wider organisation. We talk about bringing people with you. We talk about the elephant and the rider, if that rings a bell. And we talk a little bit around psychological safety as well. That might all sound completely weird, but it will make sense over the course of the next 2 hours. Books. Now, we share a lot of similar reading lists by the sounds of it. And for once, we have included all the links for you, so have a look underneath below. You will see 4 or 5 books, some of which are free, and you can go and find them. If you want to develop yourself, maybe you'll find them useful. And also, don't skip to the end, but Joe finishes with a real slam dunk, talking about the power of positively influencing change. So stick around for that one. If you want to find out more about Joe, you can find him on LinkedIn. The link is under here as well. And you can also find him at joehassellcommand.co.uk. So if you are sitting comfortably and buckled up for safety, we will jump in there with Joe Hassell, and I will see you all on the other side. Joe, welcome to the podcast. How are you, my friend?
I'm very good, thanks, Pete. Thank you very much for having me.
Hey, I think you are possibly one of the, you're right up there with a couple, but you're possibly one of the best prepared guests we've ever had. And I don't mean that's like you've been spent days and days researching stuff. I just mean you were so generous with some of the information and stuff you provided to me and the team before we sort of sat down to have a chat today. And there's so many rabbit holes as we sort of had our initial chat before we came on today, and just looking through some of the bits we're going to speak about today. I feel a little bit of, not fear, but a little bit of sort of responsibility that we don't want to miss some stuff, because there's so many wonderful nuggets that I feel we can go into the forest of this conversation and collect so many things. And I don't want to leave anything uncovered. So for people, this might be a little bit all over the shop today, because there's honestly just so much great stuff. And there's a compliment to yourself.
What you said there, Pete, that's interesting. About being prepared, I think, and I'm really happily talk about this perhaps at one stage if we talk about promotion processes and stuff. I never get nervous about stuff like this or promotions as long as I prepare properly. So I have done a little bit of prep for this, just to make sure that you and more importantly, the people that will hopefully listen to this will hopefully, if there's any nuggets in there for them, hopefully I'll do my best to try and uncover them, just from a personal experience anyway.
There will be, mate, and we'll peel those layers together as we go through it, because you're absolutely right. I always think of the podcast as like a legacy resource. Thousands of people listen to it every single week, and we have loads of people go back and re-listen to stuff. And that's why I think of each episode almost like a mini, like when document briefs get used to released, and we used to read manuals of firemanship and little, articles from across the pond or something like that. I see these as those now. And that's why I think it's so great. So I wanted to start at the end. Which is not what we traditionally do. The end sounds a little bit morbid, because actually you're far more than just the thing you do. But we were speaking before about the logistics, the challenges, the stress, the political landscape perhaps as well, around where you finished your first career with the Fire and Rescue Service as a retired Deputy Chief Fire Officer, as you now are. So I kind of wanted to go straight in there and ask you, what is it actually like working at a senior level in the Fire and Rescue Service? Because many of our guests that we have on are still in the sector. So there's you have to take everything with a little bit of a spin sometimes.
Yeah. Well, so one is very rewarding. So certainly, I suppose I can talk about the good stuff, the bits, and this is obviously just from a personal perspective.
Yes.
Talk about the things that I found really rewarding and interesting. I can also very happily talk about the things that are really challenging. You know, I think this is useful for people who are thinking about promotion, thinking about looking at those sort of.
Mate, because there's so many people doing that now. Like, you'll know far better than me. And the reason you're training so many people, and I forgot to say, by the way, for people that you do obviously run an instant command company and blah, blah, blah. There's so many people racing through that promotion scale now because we're having so much retirement, aren't we? So loads of people are literally asking the questions that you're going to be going through today because they're like, do I want to go for that next thing? Do I want to go for watch, station, area, group, chief, God, whatever it might be in their own service? Those are the questions people are asking themselves. What's it going to be like for my personal life, for my professional life? How is my balance going to change?
So I think so they're really all really important questions and all things that I asked myself when I was thinking about, I suppose I'm talking about strategic management, starting at area manager, really, although that role you kind of got 1 foot in strategy, 1 foot still in firmly planted in delivery. But I think the difference is it's the amount of influence. When you're thinking about group manager and those kind of things, your department or your team, the edges are pretty straightforward. You kind of know what your role is. You've seen others doing it well. You're working within quite normally, perhaps not a large peer group, but certainly depending on how big your brigade is, you're working with other sort of like-minded people who have their role pretty well defined.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together. Do they though? Because, I mean, it's obviously well defined in the very small or the relative sphere that they operate in, but like from the boots on the ground perspective, and this is so I work as a watch commander currently in a service in the UK. I'm not sure what they do, and that's not a like what the bloody hell are you doing with your time question, like an accusation. It's more of a what do you do? I know you attend a lot of meetings, and I know your name's on some stuff, but what are you doing?
Yeah. So I suppose from a middle manager, we're going to have to go back again, Pete, before we go forward, if that's all right.
100%. Lay the landscape. So hold my hand as a child.
That's
and
okay. So
it.
let's go right back to let's go from watch manager to middle management. So watch manager, and again, I can only talk about my own experience. I can, this is, I think, what this is about really. So from my perspective, when I was a watch manager, that was very clear. My watch was my job. Yes, I communicated with the other watches, but that they had their own watch manager. It was those parameters were very clearly defined. I had performance standards that I had to do around visits and around various other sort of key metrics, but basically it was to run my watch and make sure everyone was trained properly, and when they went out the door were
running a little happy household yourself.
Absolutely. And so your balance there between friendship, people that you know and like on your watch, and performance management is I've seen people do that very well, but mostly I've seen people do a sort of an okay job of that. But I think other influences, because you are living and sleeping and working together, people become your very close friends, and that can sometimes make watch management a bit more complex, I would say, a bit more sometimes difficult to manage. If you're going on holiday with someone on your watch and then 3 weeks later they're turning up late for various reasons, or they're not performing well, that's quite a difficult balance to get right.
Especially because you know so much about them personally as well. They're running their electrician business. They're whatever, they've got their side hustle going on, and and you're like, oh mate, you're putting me in a very awkward position here.
And I think we're quite we are quite unique. I haven't talked about on call yet. Hopefully we'll get onto that. I mean, that's even more complex.
Oh,
and
bloody hell, yeah.
those watch managers have even more, it's a lot more work, but perhaps we'll talk about that as a slightly separate one.
Absolutely,
I've not been on call myself, so I can't really comment on that from a first person perspective. But then when you move into middle management as a station manager, actually you have to leave that behind, and you have to ensure that really it's performance management becomes the focus of your job. Making sure that everybody, whether you're running 1, 2, 3, 4 stations or whatever, every service is different, but actually you're now moving from, I suppose, as your peers would see it, the top of your tree from a operational first out the door, response, to now
most of the time you're the most senior person on the incident ground, most of the time, for all the ready day-to-day stuff.
Yes, and you have all the kind of respect and the autonomy, especially at incidents, to do that. And and if you do a good job of it,
you're a big fish in a small pond, aren't you?
Yeah, you are, and you're rightly respected for it if you do a good job. Once you move to station manager, actually now you're away from a watch, you're on a station, you're working probably within a station management team, whatever brigades would describe that as, and I suppose you're now actually back to the sort of the lower level of that middle manager bit now, and that's fine. I really enjoyed being a station manager, but it can be quite frustrating. It's sort of known as the sort of sponge, that middle manager layer, because a lot of information comes in, some of it goes out, some of it's retained, and it can be really challenging. And also, if you you do have some autonomy, or I had some autonomy as a station manager, and luckily I was in charge of things like incident command schools and stuff, where thankfully I was given the space by my managers to just get on with it. Thankfully, I'd done a few bits before when I was in Essex. I did 21 years in Essex before I then moved to Devon and Somerset.
Right.
And thankfully I'd done a lot of incident command. I'd been in incident command training and set up the watch manager process for incident command in watch and crew management.
Yes, I've got a note to ask you about that, actually.
Yeah, so I did a lot of
that.
And then thankfully when I moved to Devon and Somerset, I had a sort of learning and development job first, and then I there was a gap in the incident command school, which was newly formed, and I did everything I could to get that job, because I knew it would fit within my skill level, but also I knew I could add value there and could kind of hit the ground running, which thankfully I did. And that meant actually I was very fortunate that my managers then said, okay, he looks like he knows what he's doing, let's just let him get on with it. Which was great. But I think typically the station manager role, you're really being pushed on performance all the time. Your group managers are going to be coming to you with what's going on that station. Okay, there's an issue. Have you done an investigation? Have you followed the due process? Have you liaised with HR? How are they getting on with their visits? How they got, it is really performance management and standards, really, that role.
That sounds very lonely, mate. And this is I'm personal coaching moment.
Okay.
This is where I'm at the moment. I've been pushed for the last year or so to do my SMs. Pete, you should go and do your rider station officers. You should be a station manager, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
What I'm worried about, and it's why I find conversation like this so insightful, I feel like there's a bunch of people over the other side of the wall in the station manager and above areas, and they're all saying, Pete, come on, go over, come and stand with us. It's great. I'm trying to peep over the wall because I'm worried they're waist deep in shit, and they're just not telling me, because none of them seem particularly happy, like they've been in soggy shoes that stink for a couple of years. So like a couple of people, when I'm mentioning names, like in services that I've worked in or services that I'm working currently, some of them look like they've had a terminal illness. And that's not, I'm not joking, and I don't think they have, because I know them quite well, but they look very drained. And they're also I hear lots of talks, and I think station managers, just to focus in on this for a minute, is one of my biggest concerns from a mental health perspective, because I think it's the first time they, like you've already articulated very well, that they get ripped out of that structure, they get ripped out of that support network. They're still going to a lot of jobs. They've just heaped a load of stress on top of these boys and girls, and I worry about them ones. I just worry about them.
Yeah,
and,
that's a really good question, and absolutely something I was worried about or concerned or was thinking about. And so when I was in Essex as a watch manager, I was looking around, and again, Essex has moved on hugely culturally now. So there's some great people who have moved in and have really done a good job there. But, I'm going back sort of 10, 11, 12 years. Actually, just before a particular report was came out that described the culture there as toxic and corrosive. So it was in a bad place, and it's completely moved on, and which is fantastic. But at that point, I was looking around thinking, I feel like I'm done as a watch manager. I feel like I've done everything I can do, and I'm kind of looking for the new challenge. My children are a little bit older, and I was thinking about. And
how old would you been? Sorry to ask a person.
I would have been, how old am I? 50. So I'd have been about 40. And I'll be honest with you, Pete, I was a watch
40.
manager.
So you've done some very quick jumps since then.
Yes, I have.
Okay, sorry.
Which I'll happily talk about. So I was a watch manager, and when I reflect back, too long. I was a watch manager for about 11, 12 years at different stations and at different watches, all large multi-pump stations in large towns. And partly that was a life choice because my children were very young, and we decided that I was going to do, and I also ran my own fire training business on the side to kind of keep things ticking over, mainly so my wife could look after the kids, and then she went back to work again. Personal choice, and loved it. And I'll be honest, I loved being a watch manager. Absolutely loved it. Really enjoyed it. Loved doing that. But it got to a point where, a bit similar to you, people were nudging me, but I was looking around in Essex, and at that point, the culture just wasn't right. And I was thinking, I don't want to be a middle manager in Essex. At that point, there was it was a really difficult, real conflict between mainly the fire brigades union and senior managers, and it just looked like an impossible task, to be honest with you. There,
bit of a quagmire in some places.
Yeah, it really was. Yeah, and again, I'll say, I know I've still got really good friends in Essex, and they're all telling me that things are really moving on, and they're doing some great work there. So I'm going back a long way now. But at that point, it's not. So I was starting to look around at different brigades to say, well, actually, maybe if I want to do it, maybe doing it somewhere else is my better option. And that's how it happened across Devon and Somerset. That was an interesting, one, you'd always talk about, as lots of people do, should we move to Cornwall? Should we move to Devon?
A lot of people talk about it.
I talk about it, and I'd been one of those people who talked about it, and it was only so I thought, well, I'll apply. I talked to my wife about it. Shall I apply? Yeah, well, I'll apply, and then we'll see. And I kept getting through the next stages and going, well, I'll keep going. I think there's about 8 stages or something at that point.
Wow.
And it was only when I was actually offered the job that we then went, right.
Oh, shit. Got to do something about this now.
It was, so we went to bed. So that night we went to bed, and I'd kind of said to my wife, shall we do it? And she just went, I don't think I can. I don't think I can.
And that's fair, mate, because family, friends, kids, everything.
100%. So we went to bed, my wife saying, I just don't think I can leave our friends and my family. As much as I can see all those things, I just don't think I can do it. So I said, okay, that's fine. Let's sleep on it, and I'll ring them in the morning. So I got up the next morning and said, right, I'll kind of eyebrows raised. Right, I'll ring them, shall I? And shall I say, no?
Begrudgingly.
And I suppose it wasn't really begrudging me. It was more just saying, it was a mass. We knew nobody down here. We had no friends or family here. It was for me. It was straight. You move in the fire service as the person that was in it. I knew I'd move, and I'd meet other like-minded people, and I'd be all right. I was worried about the impact, not on my kids, because they were all at primary school then, and I knew they were all pretty resilient.
They make friends quick, don't they?
But I was worried about my wife.
Yeah,
about her moving and doing that. But that morning she just said, look, we've got to do it. We can't, we will, if we don't do it, we will regret it for the rest of our lives. That sort of what if conversation. Yeah. So the worst thing that happens is we move, we don't like it, and then, okay, we'll find a way of moving back. If we really hate it, then we'll just, there will be a way of somehow.
Possible. Yeah.
So we said, right, let's do it. And it was the best career decision I've ever made, and life decision, actually, other than obviously meeting my wife and having children.
yeah, go put that.
But from a career perspective, absolutely was the best decision I ever made. And the reason was, the culture was very different, and that's why I'm saying you can't. I think when you're saying about, you look at some of your colleagues above you and it looks like they've been, punched in the face. It can be like that. That wasn't the experience I had. I moved into middle management and went, wow, I felt like I've been set free a little bit actually, and went, wow, this is brilliant. Yes, you have measures and performance measures and all of those things, but if the culture's right, and group managers, the role above the station managers, they're under, rightly, we are now moving to a performance managed organisation. I think the fire service has been a bit late to the party, really. I've heard you talk, Pete, about your being in the private sector and actually how hard productivity is pushed. I do a bit of work with a company.
Oh yeah.
Central.
We really focus on the metrics and the marginal gains, and you can really get quite granular with where the bottlenecks, whether they be people, whether they be equipment, resources, whatever it might be, and there's less emotion and romanticism, is that even a word, tied to what the cause is behind this thing. But we are very romantic in the emergency services, certainly in the fire service. Some of it comes under the umbrella of traditionalism and the role of the first responder and that unspoken hero analogy that still gets spoken about, which is true to an extent, although I think it's a bit stretched, because we are trained to do the thing that we do, just like anybody else is in their profession. But it does make it harder sometimes when you try and ask people to quantify or, give a metric to the value they add to their community. And they're like, well, we shouldn't have to prove our value. You shouldn't have to prove what we do. Well, no, you should, really, because you do want to get paid for it. And I'm sure you'd mind if we said, oh, well, it's thereabouts around what we pay you. I'm pretty sure you'd want it to be accurate for the time that you've done. So we do want something out of your time as well. In other news, this episode is brought to you in partnership with MSA Safety. Today we have them to thank for the improved firefighter safety through connectivity in their brand new connected firefighter system. At the center of the connected firefighter platform is the MSA M1 SCBA with telemetry. You can view battery life, air pressure, and estimated time remaining either independently on the M1 itself or from the Luna connected device screen. Also, still with the air status, alarm information, search status, and all of this provided to the incident command for confident decision making during the scene. That integrates straight in with the Luna system, which is a wireless all-in-one device creating an independent search and rescue network, providing edge detection, enhanced personal thermal imaging, while simplifying post-scene reporting and data retention. One of the key parts of the Luna is their FAST system, the Firefighting Assisting Search Technology. This combines directional and distance information with thermal imaging to help find separated teammates and decrease response time. It actually connects you to the other crews in the vicinity for a unified search during the time of mutual aid by instantly notifying the network of Luna devices when there is a downed crew member, allowing for a prompt search and rescue. All of this then plugs into the FireGrid system for cloud-based connectivity, real-time information, and data-driven decisions for the incident commander. It enables you to see the exact location of your firefighters on the scene. And it doesn't require you to be sat on the station. The MSA Hub then provides a wireless gateway straight to the cloud, enabling wireless on-scene data for local and remote incident command for additional eyes on the scene. MSA are truly taking massive strides in the future of improved firefighter safety through connectivity. MSA is dedicated to increasing safety in the fire service through technological advancements. Various feature enhancements, new products, partnerships, and integrations will provide additional capabilities readily accessible by products, software, and services in the brand new MSA Connected Firefighter platform. Now back to the show.
And so I think as a station manager, absolutely there is pressure there. That's I suppose the first time I experienced pressure that I had. And I will just need to carry out this. By the way, I left school, went to art college for 2 years, and then joined the fire brigade. So I'll be clear, this is the fire service is the only full-time job I've ever had.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I'm definitely speaking about this from someone who has only worked in the fire sector, which is, by the way, when we come to senior management, can be a huge can be an advantage in some areas, can be a massive disadvantage when you start giving,
because it's something I want to ask you as well, or on the same vein with the direct entry stuff, but I'll put a pin in that for now. But I think it's relevant.
Yep, perfect. So as a station manager, absolutely you're managing performance, but if you're working within the right team environment, if your boss, leader, managers have set the right kind of culture for you to be able to manage that performance in a way that suits your management style. As long as you're getting the right results, and it can be hugely rewarding. It can also be quite stressful and difficult. So my advice to anyone thinking about that is go and speak to lots of people. Try spend if you really want promotion, go and take a day off and go and sit in their office for the day and listen and watch and observe and ask questions, be curious, find out more before you make that leap. It can be hugely rewarding. But you have to understand you are also, you're accountable, and you should be accountable. That's your job.
Yes.
So the bit that, interestingly, Pete, the bit that hit me the most was, I can remember working in an office, and my first job was like a learning and development job. It was quite complex. It was all around competencies and stuff, which I have to say probably wasn't perhaps suited to my.
Yeah.
I
feel that with people that have got like NOG as their reference as a watch manager.
If you're that detail person, great. For me, I was given a job that probably wasn't quite suited to what I thought would get the best out of me, but that's okay. I was so tired. I can remember I'd get to about 3:00 in the afternoon on like the Wednesday or Thursday working. At that time, I wasn't on a rotor. I was just 9 to 5, and I was absolutely knackered. I was so tired because I just wasn't used to working that sort of 9 to 5. I was used to, shift systems and sort of having, I having to concentrate. So that was the bit that actually, and that took me about 3 or 4 months to get used to. That's sort of
couldn't just hardline the caffeine and hope for the best.
Well, I did, yes, I did. I drank way too much coffee, but that was the bit that took the most getting used to, actually. And you learn that the most interesting thing is, as a station manager, and I'd advise anybody to do this, is once you start you'll be asked to go, oh, can you go to this meeting for me? Or can you, what's it about? Don't worry, here's some stuff, have a look. People are speaking a different language. They're starting to speak in sort of, I used to describe it as sort of headquarters language. Now, when you're in that, you understand it and you see it. But I used to have a notebook covered in 3-4 letter acronyms, and where I'd just be writing stuff down thinking, what is that, what's that, what's it? And then going back and researching and asking people about what. So certainly every job I've ever had, the first 6 months easy is you're learning what the job is, to try and understand it, to try and understand all of those kind of things around.
Is it important to do that before you implement change yourself? Because I forget what book it was I read, but they do give a good, I think they call it a 90-day condoring or something like that. When you go into a role and you spend the first 90 days just ears open, mouth shut, just listen, learn, absorb, observe. Don't go straight in there and someone says, oh, well, all those computers are wrong. I told so-and-so 7 years ago we should have had these ones. Great, here's 10 grand, go and get them. And you've not got the what in. That's just a silly micro example, but
yeah, I can see why that's advice. I wouldn't want to put a number on it. I think certainly
people want to please people, though, don't they? They want to get in there and make a difference, in air quotes.
Yeah, and so I think listening is absolutely a fundamental part of being a leader. If you don't listen, you're not understanding what's happening. And you'll only have your own view. So definitely listening and getting a feel for something. I suppose I can only talk from personal experience. I've had roles where it's taken me quite a while to understand the areas, the roles, and so I wouldn't say I've put any kind of time limit on not doing anything, not sort of committing to change for 90 days, but definitely it's taken me a long time to understand it, and listening to people and taking their advice. Part of the issue the UK Fire and Rescue Service, and probably this is probably worldwide as well, is our retirement profile. There's lots of people retiring at the moment, and therefore what that means is, and I had experience of this myself, of going through quite a lot of roles quite quickly because people are retiring and there's gaps and somebody's got to go in them. So basically, and I'll talk about this maybe a bit later about the different roles I had at senior management level. But what that means is you have to be a conductor. You can't just go in and bulldoze and say, we're going to now do that. You need to listen, and you need to trust first you need to get to know your staff personally, as well as just from a professional, so you know what makes them tick. But also, you need to be able to trust them. You need to have a relationship where you can trust the subject matter experts to be good at their job. And you're there to try and create the best environment for them to be able to do that. Because we talked about this before. I was put in roles, in charge of program management office with no formal project management experience, where you have to trust people to do their job, but what you have to do is create the right environment for them to be able to form their own teams and do all of that, and then come to you with with a clear idea of how they want to do things, and you have to be understand what they're talking about so that you can agree or not agree. And that's the challenge for a lot of leaders now in the fire service, is that because of the amount of people that are retiring, people are moving through ranks very, very quickly, which has got massive pluses, but it's also got big minuses as well.
There's big risk involved with it. Yeah. How do you stop yourself from micromanaging when you move into new roles, because you're so familiar and comfortable with the old role? And again, an easy example is the watch to SM, but any promotion still has the same relationship, really, where you're like, you want to reach back down to the people you're now in charge of and tell them how best to do their job, when really sometimes it's a way to secretly hide from getting amongst your job and you're not doing.
So that's a good point. What people tend to do is, when they're put in moments of stress, they revert back to their comfort zone. And usually, if you're a station manager, I can only talk about myself. If I've been a watch manager for years, I get a station manager's role and I'm put under a bit of pressure, I'm going to revert back to the details that I'm comfortable with, because I know I can control those, because I know what they are.
Yeah.
So there is a bit of that. I think with the micromanaging bit is, well, for a start, if you're doing your job properly now as a middle manager, senior manager in the fire and rescue service, you haven't got time to micromanage. Actually, the demands are too great. There's too many other things going on that you'll be concerned about. But the other bit is, I think, this is about sort of situational leadership, isn't it? Whereas there are times you might have to step in and perhaps manage something slightly tighter, but you don't want to be doing that for long. You want to be just resetting the parameters and the railings, and then moving back and trusting people. I think the bit I learned the most when I moved to area manager was, one, I didn't have time to micromanage, but two, I sometimes people would be doing things in a way that I might not have necessarily been how I would have done it. But the point is the end result, am I comfortable with the end result? If I'm comfortable with the end result and they're doing it their way, and they are feeling they are achieving, and they're working their team in a way that's really positive, and everyone's feeling that they're achieving something at the end of it by doing it their way, brilliant. Because if that means,
well, that's the best way to encourage innovation and change, isn't it? Because otherwise, like, if we don't embrace neurodiversity as much as we claim to, wink at it and sort of tip the hat at it, if you don't allow people to do things in a slightly different way, you won't come across some of the innovations and the efficiencies and the changes in process that will probably revolutionize some of the challenges that we're facing.
And I think one of the most rewarding experiences I've had in the fire and rescue service is when I was made head of transformation as an area manager. Bear in mind, I come from a temporary group manager role where I've been helping run the Plymouth group, which is a fantastic job. Really kind of a big city, Plymouth, 5 fire stations within the city and various other on-call stations on the surrounding peripheries. Brilliant job. Did that temporarily for a while, then was moved into the chief's sort of staff officer job, which again, for learning about strategic management, was a year there was massively beneficial.
Yeah.
And then I got an area manager's job, head of transformation. So what does that mean? It's kind of, what am I?
I'll say the head of transformation means your job is to change stuff.
Yeah, so exactly. So define.
The firefighters don't like the way things are, and they don't like change. So it's hard.
Exactly. So that role, it wasn't really defined at that point. It was a new role that the organisation knew there needed to be some significant changes, but hadn't actually defined them. So part of my role was to try and set up a team that was going to do that. So I set up an organisational development team, and that, and OD teams can take various different. They can be integrated with the HR. They can be separate. You can use them for various different things. But the most rewarding bit I had was taking a team that had all been told, right, you taken out of L&D, right, you're now the OD team, and sort of helping mold them. And by the way, and I was not an OD expert, but by bringing someone in to help me, to coach me into understanding what OD was, so I could go, right, now understand it, and help me coach the team. Once we'd defined the purpose of the team linked to the organizational strategy, and I had the right people in the right post so I could trust to do their job. What a team that was. The stuff they did in the kind of 3-4 years setting up the transformation process, and it was sort of it was the how the change was going to happen rather than what was the change. That was done by a slightly separate department. It was, how are we going to influence that change within this organization? So this team were kind of dealing with the how. But
who did you, sorry, just to zoom in there, who did you actually, and it doesn't matter if you don't know the name or the company, but just like when you're looking for help with organizational change, transformational change management, Six Sigma, Kaizen, whatever it might be, how were you able to identify the cowboys? Because that is a little bit of the Wild West, that part of the sector now. And there's a lot of people across LinkedIn and across the emergency services and business in general helping companies do this. Some have never done it themselves. Some they've gone and learned it, but they're not practitioners. They have not been in the weeds. They're not change management plumbers. They haven't actually been and done it, but they can tell you how to do it. So what did you find that worked? Was there any particular person, or when people are looking for these people, what would you look for?
Personal recommendations for me normally work. So if someone's saying to you, try this person, they've been fantastic. One of the things I learned, I think, Pete, as a area manager and definitely sort of an assistant chief, deputy chief, was getting a trusted group of people from various different sectors and the fire sector and others to chat to informally about this sort of thing, to go, do you know anyone who's, what's your experience being in, for example, getting in a management company to help you with this? What do you think about this? I had to reshape our human resources function when I was the deputy chief or the director of people. And so I
thought they were the ones in charge.
Sorry,
I thought HR were in charge. I didn't think the chief. I don't know how it works sometimes. Different services are different.
Yeah, each service is different. So, but for me, then it was about getting advice from people who, Anne Millington, the chief of Kent, for example, has got a huge amount of experience, HR experience, psychology experience. So having a conversation, a half-hour chat with her about some challenges. So having a good, trusted network of mentors and people that can help you with that. I think I've always been quite clear about what my limitations are. I think I know what I'm good at, and I think I know what I don't know and what I'm not so good at. And I've never been ashamed to sort of ask people advice and say, what do you think about this? And I found that.
Did you ever articulate that to your teams, the things, because I ask a lot of people, like, what areas, because I'm open about the things, and I'm happy to tell you the things that I'm not very good at, but a lot of people say, I said, what are you working on at the minute? What are your areas of sort of development? Where do you think? And they're like, some people, it's that old Johari's window, the unknown unknowns. They just seem oblivious to things that are glaringly obvious to others.
Yeah, so I used to get 360 feedback every few years in different roles. I don't know if you've ever done that, but you basically... I'm
trying desperately hard to push it into my service now. I used to do it in my last organisation.
So I found that for those of you listeners who aren't familiar with what that is, it's a sort of management tool, and there's various different iterations out there. But basically, the concept is you or not necessarily you ask. Hopefully, it's done by somebody else. Ask people that you work with, that work for you, that work around you as peers and are your bosses and others in the organisation, to basically feedback on your behaviour, really, and your performance. And it's done in a very professional way, in that there's normally some kind of form that they fill in with comments. What that should do then is, with your Johari's window, that part of yourself that you can't see that others see, hopefully that shows you. Now, the point is, you have to be open to it. If you're defensive when you're getting 360 feedback, you have to be open to understanding that you don't know everything, and that there are things that you're not going to be great at. So I've always found them really valuable. And what they'll do is they'll should tell you what your strengths are. So I mightn't think I know what my strengths are, but certainly that will either be reinforced, or they might not be my strengths once I've had my 360 feedback from those who work around me. So I think if you take that seriously, and I used to really, unfortunately, you end up focusing on the negatives probably more than the positives. But I think that definitely gives you a sense of who you are and what your strengths are and what you're not so good at.
Did you put yours together yourself? Because my service don't actually do it. So mine's just a Word document. It's a 2-pager. It's about 14, 15 questions and a 1 to 10 scale. And it's like, it'll give a statement like, I feel this person is trustworthy. Strongly agree, strongly disagree. This person listens to me. This person is open to change. This person, and I'll have a series of things like that. This person appears well organized when they are running a project or a day in training, that I currently run. I'll have a bunch of things on like that, and then I'll leave space for notes underneath each one for allow for greater detail. And again, these are all done anonymously. Well, they're when you get someone to facilitate, and again, this is only how I've ever done them, ran them for people. Someone facilitates for you, and you ask for, I think I suggest 6 people, and I ask them to suggest 4 others. People that are not just your mates. Don't just do people that you work with every day. Someone from a different department, someone you've done a project with once, someone that works with you, someone that works for you, someone you work for, and try and triangulate all those things, and then they're sent back to that person, and they just put them into a spreadsheet, so it's anonymous feedback. Did your service actually do it when you were there, or did you have to do this yourself?
Yeah, so they did, but it was more to do with, so yes, they did. And I know lots of others do it. There's different ways you can do it. The ones, I suppose, the ones I can say that have worked the best for me have been done by an external or have been done by either someone internal who's got the process, who facilitates it, or done externally. The best one I had ever was externally, where I say the best one I have, I don't mean the best feedback, I mean the best process, the best 360 process.
Because we struggle with confidentiality in the fire service.
I think we've all probably had experiences of that. But the best one I had was when it was facilitated by someone who was a trusted sort of management leadership consultant, and it was actually for promotion to area manager at that point. I was very lucky enough to get in a sort of an accelerated leadership program, which didn't quite turn out how we thought it was going to. But the fact was, it gave me access to a few of these things, like such as this.
Isn't it a problem though that you only get those things when you reach that level? When we look at some of these cultural reviews, some of the biggest problems that happened on station level, these facilities, I imagine, due to financial constraints, are not available to people at those lower ranks. Well, it's almost like we're putting the chicken before the egg, because we wait to develop people until they're area manager level. And I'm like, it's a bit too late by then. A lot of the damage is done.
Yeah, I can only talk on my own experience for that. I know now that certainly in a lot of brigades, you can have access to that at much, at every level and at every role, so those things now, I mean, it is expensive, it takes time, it's expensive. So, and I'm also not suggesting everybody in the service should be doing it all the time. It should be done every few years, change of role, change of, it's for you, really. It's for you as a, and sometimes they're done when perhaps someone hasn't done so well, or struggling to get through processes, or has had some negative feedback. Sometimes it's used then to get some 360 to try and help someone understand, that missing part of themselves that they sometimes can't see. So there's various different times when you would do it, and all brigades are different. So I can only comment on my own experience, where I did have access to it at relatively regular intervals if it was needed. But I think the bit it was the way in which the feedback was done, which was the valuable bit for me for that particular one. Okay. I was talking about, because I had someone steering me through it, and actually who really understood the process, but also when there were areas for me to improve, it wasn't just a blunt sort of bit of paper I was reading and then on my own in my office going, oh no, someone thinks this about me. Actually, it was explained to me that, hey, here were some themes and here's some areas that, and so that I found really useful. So I think
some of them are just like, you'll find someone that just hates you, and there'll be one piece of feedback that sticks out from the rest. That doesn't mean to totally ignore it, but if there's not a general trend for it, it might suggest that this person has just seen the opportunity to hit you with a stick.
And on every 360 feedback I've ever had, I've always deliberately gone to a couple of people that I would say I had a bit of a clash with or a bit of a conflict with, purely because their view on me is as valuable as someone who I kind of know what most people I work with, if I think I'm getting on well with them, that's great. But actually, I kind of know that because I trust them and we talk about stuff anyway. I'd rather understand. And if I have clashed with someone, or if someone, if I'm not getting on with someone about, I'll give you an example. When I moved to Devon and Somerset, I was looking at, I was in the training department, and there were some areas in BA that Essex I felt did very, very well. And that I was looking at Devon and Somerset going, not sure. There's some bits they were doing fantastically, but some bits I didn't feel they were. And I had the conversation with a particular manager there who was just shutting me down. And I was just saying, I'm sorry, I just disagree with you. There are some fundamental things here I think we need to improve on, which eventually did get improved, But that particular person, I don't think he liked me very much, because I was someone coming to a new brigade saying to this person, actually, I think there's some better ways you can do some things. And I was tried to do it in the best way I possibly could, but the most productive and sort of sensitive way. But this, I felt it was a safety critical issue. But so, for example, I made sure that person gave me 360 feedback, because I was thinking, well, did I approach that in the right way? Did I go in either too heavy, or was I not sensitive enough, or was I? So that feedback to me was really valuable, because there's always going to be people in organisations that for some reason you have a little bit of a clash with. That's human nature. So I wanted to understand, how did I deal with that? And that was really valuable to me.
I wanted to ask you about challenging puzzles around culture, because I know it's something I've seen and read and heard you speak about before, and you do make some very pertinent points in it. And again, we're not pretending to speak from some mountain upon high. You're not holding tablets and giving people the answer to cultural change in the fire and rescue service. But times when you have seen it done well, or whether that's in your own services and your other services, it is obviously something that almost all services are looking for a solution to, even if it's just a marginal gain. They're looking for the 2%, the 5%. I don't think anyone thinks they're going to get a consultant that's going to turn it on its head and, sunflowers are going to start growing out of its arse. It's something we are going to have to take a lot of time working on. We didn't get here in a day. It's going to take years to change this. But times you've seen it done well, what are some of the low-hanging fruit, or even some of the marathon tactics that you've seen implemented?
So I think the first bit, really, it's all about employee engagement. If you're doing change to people, in my experience, that rarely comes out as a very positive result. It's even if you're the organizational strategy, if a change has to happen, if it's very clear, you maybe budget restraints, cultural issues, whatever, if a change has to happen, doing it to rarely works as well as engaging staff and doing it with, so I think that's probably the bit that I would say. When we bought our part of my role when I was an area manager was to redo our values, because they were a bit long, and they were done they were designed by a team and then sort of put into place. And a few years later, they just weren't really, no one was really, they were just a thing on a wall. Basically.
No one knew what they were. Didn't mean
no, and they were just words on a page on a wall in all the offices, but no one talked about them. No one was living them, So we had a real long think about it. We brought in some people that we trusted, actually the people that I'm doing a bit of work for, Innovation Central, who kind of really helped us with our approach. And their suggestion, which by the way, I'm doing this with them with other organisations as well, was you have to engage with staff. So what we did is basically went to our staff and said, what do you think is important around behaviours, around the way you all work together? What do you think how do you think you should be behaving? And that then formed our values. So it wasn't a senior management team saying, right, everyone, here's your new values, live to these values. It was us saying, we've asked you what's important to you when you come to work around behaviors, around how people should behave, the things that you should be seeing, and clearly the things that you don't want to see. And we engaged with a huge amount of the organisation on that, loads of working groups, loads of, and to this day, those values are absolutely lived. Now, I wouldn't say everybody lives them, because an organisation reflects society, and you're always going to have those people that unfortunately don't live the way in which others want, which we want them to. But overall, people really did, those values are deeply embedded now. because, and I will say, and it's because we engaged our staff with it, you know, and got them involved, and they formed them. That they were service values, not just done to.
How do you do it in such a way that remains authentic but is also professional? Because I look at companies or organizations like the All Blacks and people like that, and people say, oh, you know, fantastic. And it's hard making correlations to teams and sports because it is actually very, very different. It is all about winning. Whereas, you know, things like the emergency services, it's harder to connect the dots to something like winning because there's not inherently an enemy or someone that you're going against. But I love some of their stuff. Yep. As simple as no dickheads, you know, but you couldn't put that on a fire and rescue service shirt, could you? Is the problem. But half the time it's so true. You know, we're going through recruitment in my department at the minute, and people are saying, what about this? What about that? You know, what are you looking for in a person, Pete? Because, you know, and I always say I'd rather have a hole than an arsehole, because I'd rather struggle as a team of 12 than have one dickhead that just drags everybody down because everything goes through the floor. You only need one bad egg. And it becomes poisonous. But they say, well, we can't put that on the people description. And I'm not demonstrating my lack of emotional intelligence. Obviously, this is not part of the personal specification that we're putting out to service members, but we can't put it on a T-shirt. How do you articulate what you really mean, but also keep it professional? Because if it becomes too professional, it gets, and this is kind of the whole point of the podcast, because we try and keep it a little bit authentic and we try and make it accessible and digestible to people. Because sometimes if you make something so perfect and shiny, people are like, well, that's not us, is it?
So authentic leadership's massive. You have to be able to trust your leaders. And it doesn't mean you necessarily have to, certainly doesn't, no one's going to agree with everything a leader says, or necessarily if you're working in an organization, you can see change coming. You may not agree with it, but what you want is leaders who are authentic, who'll be as honest as they can with you and tell you the truth. So I think that's the main sort of bit that I always used to try and do. And, you know, I put in some changes that weren't necessarily popular. We closed a couple of fire stations, we removed some fire engines, and it was all based on a very, very clear business case where they weren't being used and weren't needed because we had enough cover from other areas. And we did huge public engagement. Myself and many other officers went out right across the county, engaged with the community. Some of them were very difficult. Some of them were very difficult meetings where we were having to.
Mate. I've been there at some of them.
Yeah, very
town hall style meetings in the fire station bays.
Really, really, really hard. But because I believed in why we were doing it and understood the benefits of why, where we were going to make investments in other areas and things like that. You just have to be open and honest with people and say, look, I understand that this feels like that for you, but here's what the statistics say. Here's the data. But actually, I'll come on to that in a minute around data. And
do you think it is useful going and doing those things? I know it sounds like an obvious question, but sometimes you're just going for a kick-in sometimes, because there'll be people there that my mum worked there, my dad worked there, my son worked there, my great-granddad worked at that station, and you're closing it. So you're the bad guy. And I'm just gonna come. I just want my pound of flesh, some people.
Yeah, I think so. From personal experience, I think closing a fire station or removing a fire engine from an area is always going to be difficult and controversial. The people that live there certainly are going to feel, and we closed two in the end that were actually within a footprint of a whole-time station. That a whole-time station could get there quicker than the on-call station, so they were kind of no-brainers, those ones. But still, you'd be amazed at the amount of pushback, understandably, from people because they felt that they were at risk. So I think the main thing is to understand, to explain people that we're not just closing the fire station. There's a load of other measures that are going on, additional prevention, etc., etc. But yes, some of them were. You did get a kicking. There's no two ways about it.
And that's it. But equipment, environments change, the demands change, people get pay rises. I always love the have you seen that meme of the butterfly and the caterpillar sitting at the table?
I don't think I have, no.
Butterfly and the caterpillar, you can use this one. You use it in a presentation, I guarantee it. And the caterpillar's sitting there looking at the butterfly and he goes, "You've changed." And the butterfly goes, "Yeah, we're supposed to." And that's truth, isn't it? As satirical as that may seem, life changes.
Yeah, and this particular change, our fire stations, it's certainly, I can only speak for Devon and Somerset, they've been in the same place since the 1940s. And the whole rest of society and town, cities,
business, economy, demands, population growth. It's not, we're still in the right place anymore.
So and we did bring in a flexible system where some fire engines go on and off the run at different times, depending on risk. So risk-based availability system, which, actually we got it all through in the end, or not all of it, but I suppose if I come on to change, so if I can give your listeners some advice of some bits that helped me manage change, the best bit of advice I got was by a guy. Funnily enough, I was on a campsite in Cornwall and I was chatting to this guy who was a change consultant. And he said, I was just talking to him about what my job was. And it was, I'd just been given the area manager job, head of transformation. He said, you need to read a book called Switch by Chip and Dan Heath. He said, there's a management model in there that has served me well for the last, however many years. So I did that, and he was absolutely right. So and you'll read, there's loads of change models out there. You can get confused. I've done, as many of your, I've done blooming degrees and various other things all around change. And actually, my whole ethos was, what is usable? What are the models that I can actually use in everyday life that are actually going to help me manage change? So the one that I really liked was one it's from a book called Switch, Chip and Dan Heath, and you may have heard this before, but I'll talk just briefly about it. And the reason I like it is because it's really easy to visualize. So what I want you to do is imagine there is a person sitting on top of an elephant, and there is a path in front of them. Okay, so the rider, is half of your brain, is the analytical data sort of side of your brain, and the elephant is the emotional side of your brain, and the path is the external environment. Okay, so to make change, you have to try and get all three of those elements, successful change, embedded change, you have to try and get all three of those elements right. You have to direct the rider or support the rider by giving them the right information and data so they understand clearly the direction that you're supposed to be going in. And that would be through, saying, right, everyone, we're going to have this change initiative because we've got to save this much money in blah, blah, blah. But what a lot of organizations do, the book describes this, by the way, what a lot of organizations do is they just try and influence change by giving people the data and the information. And that's it. We've got to change because this is what it says. What the book says is actually, yes, you need to influence the rider, but the elephant, if the rider can do what they want, but if you're not going to move the elephant because the elephant doesn't want to move, you're not going to move the elephant. And the elephant only moves because they want to go that way. They want to move. I'll come on to a little bit more around that. The path is about making the path as smooth as you possibly can. So if you have a health and safety system that you've just put in, but it's really, really difficult to use and no one can get on it, well, you haven't got a smooth path there. So guess what? No one's going to report any near misses because you haven't smoothed the path. The system needs to be really easy. Of course, you've got to convince people to do it first, but the path needs to be straight. So a good example of how I bring this to life is, and again, I'm going to quote from the book a little bit, is people who are overweight. If you want to lose weight, so let's say you're overweight, but you want to go on a diet. Now, that what makes you healthy and unhealthy. There's loads of stuff out there. You can read as much as you want about diets to say you need to be more healthy, you need to not eat donuts. But guess what happens when I reach for a donut? I want the donut. My elephant in me goes, actually, I'd like a donut, so I eat the donut. The bit that makes change really happen around sort of influencing the elephant is people have to see something, actually visually either see it or imagine it, which triggers something in them which makes them want to change. And usually with things like dieting, that would be, and certainly I've done this, been on holiday, I've seen a photograph of myself afterwards and gone, blimey, okay, I need to lose weight, because I'm not happy with how I look. So I've seen something which has invoked a response in me, which has made me go, not happy with that. I have to change it. I knew that I needed to do that, and I've been, I know what a healthy lifestyle is, but I hadn't been doing it. I see that and I go, I have to change. Obviously, I've then got to smooth the path. So it's about seeing something that makes you feel something, which then makes you do something. So if we move that into organizational change, it's all very well. Again, this is the book. It's all very well saying, here's why we have to change, but you have to connect it to people, that something that people are going to feel. So for example, community safety, you could, we did a lot of stuff around community safety, and it was based around the community and about them feeling safe, and making sure that people were sort of reflecting that and seeing photos of their community and things like that, which gives you that link to. It's all very well saying we want you to do more home fire safety visits, but so what? Well, here's some images of what happens if you don't do it. It's that feeling bit, So
mate, I had to try so goddamn hard. So I've written notes furiously because I had to stop myself verbally high-fiving you and interrupting you through what was a beautiful articulation of that. So for people's, we will actually link that, because Switch is, I've read it, well, I read it once, I'll be totally honest, but I've listened to it a couple of times. So Switch, the subtitle for that is How to Change Things When Change is Hard. And it is Dan Heath and Chip Heath. I forget when the original book came out, but I know the audio book came out in 2020. So we will put a link to that, because it is a fantastic book. It's a New York Times #1 bestseller. Really, really love that you've gone there with that, mate, and a great articulation of it.
And the bit that I like the best about it is they've got a whole website. All you need to do is put your email in, and you get free access to all of the tools. So you can.
Well, if you buy the audiobook off Amazon Audible, it comes as an attached PDF.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
So you download the PDF as well.
So
I've got a whole folder of that stuff.
Yeah, a lot of that for our change stuff. And there's loads of bits, and all of those bits. So the directing the rider is broken down into loads of tools in which you can do that. Steering the elephant.
Directing the rider is so important, because I used to use, have you done the 5Y? I'm sure you've done them a million times. The 5Y complex problem solving toolbox, where you basically, like you say, someone comes. I owned 2 gyms for a long time, coached people for about 10 years. And it used to be, I want to lose some weight. Okay. Why do you want to lose weight? Do you know what I mean? Because you don't actually want to lose weight, because you can lose a pound. Right. Fuck off. Are you happy now? And I used to say to people, if you lost 3 stone and you looked exactly the same, would you be happy? And I said, well, no, I want to look better. Okay. So if you look better, but you weighed exactly the same. In fact, if you look better and weighed more, would you be happy? And they're like, well, I mean, probably, but that's not really possible, is it? I said, well, of course it is, without getting into the aspects of fat versus muscle ratio and weight and size and all that sort of jazz. You may actually put on some weight, but you might be more mobile. You might be more physically fit. And not to go too far down the physical rabbit hole, because that's not what we're talking about here. But if you follow the why, you'll eventually get to, most of the time you actually get to love, which sounds a bit woo-woo, but people will go, well, I want to feel better about myself. Why? Because I want my partner to find me attractive. Why? Because if they don't, then I won't be loved. And if we followed the why of the fire and rescue service, well, I want a new fire station. Okay, why? Well, because we need more people in that area. Why? Because I want the people in the area to feel more protected. Why? Because I want them to trust the fire and rescue service. Why? Because then it will make me feel like I've done a good job, because I'm a deputy chief fire officer. And why will that matter? Because it's part of my personal value, hierarchy. I want to feel like I'm doing the thing I'm supposed to do. It makes me feel valued. And it's actually a selfish drive, which actually most people don't think about, but all drives are selfish. Even if I want to do something for my wife, I want to do it for my wife because I want her to feel loved by me. And selfishly, I like to feel like I've given her that feeling. So it's automatically selfish. But anyway, sorry, my own rabbit hole gone down there. But Switch, fantastic book. Fantastic.
Yeah, really great book. Love the tools, and actually, I also had a couple of look at there. They've got a book about decision making called Decisive, which is quite interesting. If you're looking at complex,
they've got loads. They've got one Made to Stick. There's another great one from them. The Power of Moments is another one from them.
I've got the Power of Moments right in front of me as well. There's a couple of good. Yeah, so I really like those. For me, and again, everyone's different. Matthew Syed's probably another author that some of your followers will be familiar with.
Oh yeah, a little bit of Matthew Syed. So we had, in fact, this is a great segue into. So we had Martin Bromley on the podcast. You know who Martin is?
I don't think I do actually. No,
you do. You just don't know you do. So Martin Bromley, his wife is Elaine Bromley. So Elaine Bromley is the beginning story in Matthew Syed's book, Black Box Thinking.
Right.
So we had
Understand.
Martin on the podcast, and I'd strongly encourage you to go back and
I'll have a
listen to his
that.
episode and send it to wherever, because it's a great introduction for people around psychological safety, around crew resource management, around how things are done in the NHS versus aviation. And I know that was a topic that we wanted to talk about. So I'm going to throw that softball to you to take us further. Today's podcast is powered by our partner Lifelines and their revolutionary approach to functional hydration. Just like in firefighting, water is essential for body function, but studies show more than 80% of firefighters are dehydrated. A 25-year study findings from the National Institute of Health showed poor hydration to be linked to early aging and chronic disease, and even mild dehydration results in significant negative impact outcomes, including headaches, exhaustion, rapid pulse, irritability, and poor cognitive function. A study conducted by Yale University showed that participants who were just 1% dehydrated had a 12% increase in errors when performing tasks that required cognitive flexibility. In addition, dehydration is shown to worsen mood and attitude, contribute to confusion and poor decision making, and negatively affect memory and judgment. In other words, you really don't want your incident commander, firefighter, or for that matter any first responder on a critical scene to be even slightly dehydrated. Mild dehydration occurs when a person is just 1.5% dehydrated, a condition that does not even trigger the thirst response in most people. So just imagine how quickly a firefighter or any first responder can and does become dehydrated in their day-to-day duties, which is why I address my hydration first thing every day with Lifelines. Go into the notes for this episode and specifically check out Lifeline's Hydro Fuel and Hydro OG by clicking in the notes for the podcast for a clean energy solution designed for those who demand more from their day. Now back to the show.
I'm going to catch that softball. and so those of your readers that haven't read Black Box Thinking, highly recommend it. You're right, Pete. It's basically just compares it's all around psychological safety at work, which I suppose I could talk a little bit about now. But don't let me forget, I'd like to just talk about rebel ideas again for a minute, because
I'll make a note and we'll come back and close the loop on rebel ideas.
Description in there for why inclusion is important, I think, in that book. So going back to safety culture, so we I think part of I can only speak for my previous brigade, but when we were looking at sort of some of our HMI feedback and some of our own cultural feedback, we knew that there were things that still weren't quite right in some pockets. You know, some of our cultures weren't quite there, and we were very lucky enough to have a person working, funnily enough, in the OD team, the organisational team, who had previously worked in the aviation industry. So he'd been in the Gulf War. He'd actually flown helicopters into Afghanistan, and was in the RAF, and he really helped us sort of understand sort of what psychological safety. So I'll give you the description. So psychological safety is basically, it's an organization where people feel four things. So first level is safe to feel, they feel included, they feel safe to learn, they feel safe to contribute, and they feel safe to challenge the status quo. That's all without fear of being embarrassed, marginalized, or punished in some way. So that's the kind of what psychological safety is. And if you think about cultural reviews that have come out the fire service in the last, goodness me, probably 10, 15 years, probably overall, but certainly the last more recent ones around from the NFCC and others around and the HMI around culture, psychological safety is a big part of that, where people were saying they don't feel safe, they don't feel included, they don't feel that they can raise issues. There's some issues there. So we really looked at that to say, well, how can we make sure people are safe and feel included? They feel included in us as an organization, that they can contribute, and that they can challenge. If they're not happy with something, appropriately they can say, I'm not comfortable with that, I don't like that is, so we were trying to find a way of doing that. And actually we found that the airline industry were very good at that, because they have a few things in place. You kind of need an engaged safety culture to do that. And by that, there's sort of 5 elements to it. So there's a just culture, reporting culture, questioning culture, flexible culture, and learning culture. But I'm just going to focus on 2 of those because I think it will help bring this to life. And that's just culture and learning culture. So a just culture is really creating an atmosphere of trust where people are encouraged and sort of rewarded to contribute, and where any sort of unacceptable behavior is challenged. It's really clear, and I don't like this term, any punishment is kind of the punishment fits the crime. So and linked to that is learning culture, where when things happen, you learn from them properly, and there are systems in place to make sure you're learning. Right, I'm going to bring this to life with a story that a lovely guy called Will Batho, who was the person that helped us sort of bring this into the organisation, gave me. So he was a helicopter pilot in Afghanistan, and he tells a story where one of his engineers was working on one of the Apache helicopters, on one of the engines, forgive my terminology. So he's taken the engine cover off, he's doing a repair, he's drinking from a bottle of water because obviously it's dusty, it's really hot, and he accidentally puts the water bottle in the engine compartment to put it down, puts the cover back on the Apache helicopter engine, walks off, goes 5 steps and goes, oh, wait a minute, where's my water bottle? Oh no, I've put it in it. Goes back, takes it out the engine compartment, closes the door. Right. What he then does is goes straight to his manager and says, boss, I just put my water bottle in the engine compartment and closed it. And now I've gone back and I've taken it out. Right. So the culture that they had then, the just culture means this person immediately recognized the mistake and has reported it. So they're pulling a few bits of the engaged safety culture in. And the reason they did that is because they have a culture of rewarding when people are open and honest about making mistakes. So immediately the boss didn't give that person a bollocking. They said, right, thank goodness you've told us, because someone else is going to do that. You know, there is no, someone else, it's hot, it's dusty, everyone's encouraged to drink water. Someone else is probably going to make that same mistake, and it could have catastrophic consequences. Right. We now need to learn from that. So this person didn't get bollocking, he got rewarded. Thank you for telling us. Thank you for not hiding it and pretending you hadn't done it. Thank you for actually being open and honest, because this person knew they were actually, that was really the atmosphere and the culture there was, that's what's expected. But the reason is then you're going to learn from that. So then they put in processes to say, and I couldn't tell you what they are, but right, it could be, okay, the water bottle goes around your neck on a chain and you never put on whatever. Or there's some kind of check before you. But the point was, you need to have both. You need to have a just culture, which means that person's not going to get screamed and shouted at for making a mistake, a genuine, honest mistake that anybody could have made. But then there's learning from it. So what we started to do, and again, it's a very long process, and I'm certain still happening now, is try and embed that just culture and learning culture within an organisation. And that started with myself and the chief officer visiting every single watch and every single station. It was done virtually because we were doing it over COVID, to explain what we were trying to achieve and some examples, and then starting to put those in place by things like changing the HR process with investigations and the sort of making sure there was a very clear clear path that everybody followed, so that there was consistency in all of our investigations. There was consistency in, if you've done something deliberate, if you've deliberately done something at work and you're actually out to harm, well, guess what? You're going to be, we don't want you working.
A big stick for you because we don't want you in the team.
If you're going to do that, but if you've done something that was a genuine mistake that someone else in your position would have probably made, because actually the organisation.
I did it the other day. I accidentally sent someone's occupational health report to a member of a different department. Luckily, this person is a very trusted lady that just happens to share the first name of another lady. And I sent someone out. It didn't have anything. Well, I mean, it was obviously GDPR. It was someone's personal information. Nothing too horrific. They didn't have a terminal illness, but not that remotely matters. And this person raised it to our internal system, to the person that's in charge of all the GDPR and compliance and blah, 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 raised the ticket. And it was great. And they fed it back to me. And they said, near miss, steady what you do, blah, blah, blah. But it was dealt with absolutely fine. Otherwise, that person could have gone very differently. And I learned from it, and I won't do it again. But there's not a mark on my record. Then I put a note for file. I'm not on a verbal disciplinary. It was handled very, very well.
Yeah, and so what I'd also want to see from that is, as part of the learning culture, is what prevents that happening again. And I've did that a few times as well, Pete. Normally
Yeah,
that's
well,
the
if
auto
I'd say like,
thing.
yeah, and it's probably an
I don't
IT
remember
solution in
email,
something
but
like that. That if there is an attachment that says occupational health or that says report, and some systems are great like this, they flag it as you try and send, and it says the person you're about to send it to is a member of this team. You could put in a rule that says if it's anything other than HR or occupational health, just give them a flag and say the person you're about to send it to doesn't belong to one of these departments. Are you sure you'd like to send it? That might be. I know. Again, I'm getting into the weeds of a very simple.
No, that's okay. So I think sort of to go back to the engaged safety culture, but basically what it's not saying is, and when I hear the term no blame culture, that's not right. You have that. If someone is, so bullying, harassment at work is obviously very topical at the moment. We're seeing and hearing a lot of that in the culture. Nobody wants bully anybody in the organization who's going to do that.
No.
So it's not about no blame. It's about just culture. If someone has been found to have been a bully and have been harassing people, no, you don't want them working in your organization. Go. We want to send that signal out to say we want it to be a safe working environment. You need to be physically safe and psychologically safe from people. So that is right. But if someone has made a mistake and that other people would have made in the same position or was unaware of things, then you have to have the right culture that's going to make sure that they can learn from those mistakes without, depending on what they've done, being jumped on. It's a fine line though, and took us quite a long time to.
And I think it's most important to have this as we're doing so much promotion at the minute, because again, there'll be people managing things, dealing with things they've never done before, and they will get it wrong. Yeah. So rather than coming down on them like a ton of bricks, because a lot of that will have been done out of the best of intentions, but of course they say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. They'll have tried to do the right thing. They won't have done anything maliciously, but they'll probably done the wrong thing. They'll probably sent it to the wrong place. They won't have put someone on the thing.
Yeah, do you know, HR process is probably the one that used to come on my desk the most, where we'd have an investigation, or someone was being disciplined for something, or something around that. Employment law is difficult.
That's when it falls down, isn't it?
It's
Because
really
if you
hard.
mismanage that from the get-go, the whole thing will crumble, and that person will get away with it, and you'll have a bad egg still in the organization because it wasn't managed properly.
Yeah, and more importantly, the person that's either done the investigation or has done something wrong feels, gets, because they haven't necessarily followed the correct path, feels that they might have either had a bollocking or not, so those are the sort of things unless and it's very hard to invest in, investing in training is absolutely critical for fire and rescue services, but there's a lot of training. There's a lot of things you are.
That's what I mean. But we focus so much on the operational. I mean, take me there for the minute. In all of your promotions, how much? Because they're doing a lot of pools again. There's a lot of pools happening in the UK Fire and Rescue Service, which I think are good things. And sometimes when you get into these promotion pools, that's your entry into getting the development you need before you go to the next level. But that's not adopted everywhere, and some places it's never been used at all. I mean, did you have what was your kind of experience in prerequisite training before you stepped into roles, or how much were you just thrown into the ocean of the next waves and then gone, bloody hell, I don't know how to run this system. No one's told me about this, and now I'm managing that and I don't know anything about it. And I'm now, I don't keep gravitating back to the station manager thing, but like you start getting thrown on a rota system and you don't know how it all works, and you've got an officer's car that you don't know anything about.
Correct. So that was my experience, what you've just described in all roles.
That's most people's experience, and that's terrible for people.
So that was it. But I'm like you. I'm really pleased that is now being seen as that's not right. We know that that's not right. And I think most fire and rescue services that I've seen now are thinking about promotion in a different way and are trying to develop people before they hit, so they can actually, when they get given that role, they understand the requirement. Like I said, I think when the station manager role, yes, quite rightly, when I eventually did get on a rota, it was right. Here's your keys. Here's your thing. Here's how it works. You'll be shadowed for a bit. Off you go. And the shadowing probably wasn't quite as. It was probably a little bit.
It was
loose,
6 hours on the first day.
Things have been tightened up a lot now, so which is great, and then and we learn from these things, and we put improvements in. But yeah, it's critical, really. I think the best, probably the best preparation I had for senior management, I was very lucky enough to be the chief, Lee Howe, who's the chief fire officer, Devon and Somerset. I was his staff officer for a year, which basically meant I was his sort of right-hand person. It was either a very strategic job where I was getting involved with police and crime commissioners and going to really senior transformation meetings, and was finding it absolutely fascinating learning about senior management and the trials and tribulations and the difficulties, and also the interesting stuff. But then also I would have to deal with some really kind of mundane sort of stuff that just sort of had to be done. So it was a sort of bit of both. But what that did do is it gave me a year to understand in theory what strategic management was like. It was quite different when I actually got an area manager's job, actually having to do it. That was a different experience. But that was probably the only time where I would say I was given a development opportunity that really did help me there. So I was definitely, I was very lucky that I was in that position.
I wanted to give us the opportunity to close the loop on psychological safety, because I appreciate I've dragged you down another rabbit hole before I then take you back to Rebel Ideas as we promised we would.
I think the very sort of essence of it, I think you can't, as lead, you have to really focus on developing your leaders and managers really to sort of say, you can't, it's unfair to say to people to go, if I was doing a watch visit or something, one of the first things I would be saying is, look, I want you to be open, and I'm going to be open and honest with you. I want you to be open and honest with me about what your challenges are, or about, please be free to speak, as long as it's done respectfully. I'm going to listen, it's hard to listen when you're just getting stuff shouted at you, but I'm going to listen if you're sensible about the way you talk to me about it. The respect sort of goes both ways, and actually, that always seemed to go quite well. But then when you hear the stuff that you don't like, you can't then close shop and go, well, that's rubbish. Or you have to be open to listening and understanding. Okay, I might not see it that way, or so, a firefighter is telling me about a particular issue. Now I've been told that issue's been solved. Okay, I'm going to have to look into that, because that from the ground, that's not right. So that part of that sort of fourth tier of psychological safety about safe to challenge. I think I suppose going back to my couple of the things I had with BA, that when I first joined, I wasn't safe to challenge then. I had a bit of grief actually from a few people by saying, and I felt I was doing it in the right way. Now that hopefully that's changed now. We've done a lot of leadership behavior and a lot of leadership meetings with a lot of our teams saying, we do need to be able to be in the right mindset, where if you're going to ask people a question, you need to be prepared for an answer and not be defensive. And, even if it's your department, you need to listen and go, okay, I'll take that away. As long as it's done in the right way, okay, if someone's screaming and shouting at you over a mess table, that's not respectful. And the manager.
I always say that to people. People can't hear what you're saying because of the way you're saying it. I can't understand what you're trying to tell me because of who you are. You're just so loud and aggressive. It's like listening into the wind, or speaking into the wind. Sorry, you just can't. It's the hairdryer, Alex Ferguson analogy. That's not a conversation. You're talking at me, not to me.
Yeah, and that's both. I've been sat on a mess table and had officers and managers just talking down, just talking to me and not listening. So I've been on the receiving end of it, which I think most of us probably, when we've had negative experiences, you always want to make sure when you're in that position, when you're lucky and privileged enough to be in a senior position, you're not going to make the same mistakes that you've seen, and you've learned. That's the whole learning culture bit. You've got to learn from others, and I've probably learned more from managers I didn't particularly agree with their management style than ones that were, obviously I've been inspired by many, but I probably it was more ones that I didn't, I thought, well, I'm never going to do that. That really didn't work. Or you made me feel psychologically unsafe because I've challenged something, and you've made me feel like my job's at risk or something, So I think probably they're my main sort of takeaways, is that you have to approach this as a whole large cultural change, of which there are many interwoven elements. You can't just do one bit. You can't just have a learning culture without a just culture, for example.
You know, when you're going to try and have those conversations and have them in a safe space and get rid of the rank and all that sort of stuff and really have an open and honest and transparent conversation, how have you approached them in the past when you've seen it or you've done it well yourself? Because some people go like, oh yeah, I'll take my shirt off, take my epaulets off. Not as in like going bare chested. I mean, like, take my epaulets off and just come and sit. And some people go, oh, that's BS. You know, I don't fall for that. I know this dickhead. He's not a very nice person. Blah blah blah. He can put his rank markings on the table and go, oh, I'm not on duty now. And some people are like, oh, that's rubbish. I don't. Do you see some services like there's a couple in the middle of the UK. We had Staffordshire's chief fire officer on. Rob Green? Is it Rob?
Rob?
Can't remember.
Yeah.
A terrible memory. It is Rob, isn't it? Yeah, Rob's a lovely guy. Really love him. Proper fit dude as well. Do you know what I mean? Not as in I find him attractive, although he's a handsome fella. He's just really fit and active guy. I think he used to do Commonwealth or something like that. Anyway, they all just have black T-shirts. So they don't have the rank thing. They just have names on name tags, and that's all they do. Obviously, on the fire ground, they are distinguishable from other firefighters, and they have the same rank structure there. Do you think that works? Do you think it's a useful tool? I know it's one of many tools in the toolbox, and if you are a fantastic conversationalist, you won't need that tool necessarily. How did you go about it? I apologize if I'm asking you to cover the same ground again.
So I think so culture's made up of many things. One of them is symbols. One of them are the symbols that you see around, and you could say that rank markings and shirt colors and stuff are part of that. So certainly I think there could be some barriers there around that. All brigades are different, and I wouldn't want to say what's right and wrong for different brigades. It's what you feel your culture needs. I know Lancashire at the moment, I saw Justin Johnson, their chief, who I really admire. He's saying that they're going to get rid of white shirts and everyone's going to have the same color shirt. So things like that I think can probably help. But again, you know, it's not just that. You have to have authentic leaders. Just so I think going back to your watch visit, and you've had experience perhaps of managers who, you know, say, well, no rank markings, but if their behavior is the same and if they're not authentic, I think it's all to do with authentic leadership. But personally, did understand if I'm going to a fire and rescue, if I'm going to a watch visit and I'm the deputy chief, people know I'm the deputy chief. They know that. Yeah. I certainly. So I less worried too much about what I was wearing. I wouldn't normally go in the full sort of, you know, whole, you know,
shiny dress regalia
and everything. Yeah, I probably wouldn't do that, but they know who I am. They know why I'm there. It's about you being an authentic leader. So I would always try and just make sure that I was chatting, you know, introduce myself properly, you know, said hello, shook everyone's hand, looked him in the eye, settled down, relaxed a little bit. Personally, I'd always give a little bit of, you know, just a bit of a chat, and I think I was myself. I don't think that, you know, I think I'm myself when I was speaking to fire authority members, and the same very similar person, although, you know, it's probably my language might have to don't mean
you lose smaller words. Not because firefighters are stupid.
No. More that
just because there's no need for verbal masturbation sometimes. Some people,
I think
you can alienate people by using words sometimes.
Yeah. I think I just tried to. I always hated management speak. I always hated the sort of David Brent bit, always. So I've never tried to use it. So I think it's just trying to just be honest and open with people, and just so I, you know, that I can only talk on my personal experience. I loved doing watch and station visits, going and sit with an on-call station and in fact, the bit I really loved was when you'd sit down and everyone would have their arms crossed. And it used to make me smile internally and go, brilliant, right, this is going to be one of those ones where I've got to really engage, and I've got to, you know, I would make it my, you know, inside I'm thinking, right, my job's to either win people round or at least get them to understand why we are doing something. They might not still like me. That's fine. You know, you don't have to like me, but what I would ask is you're respectful and you listen, and we can actually engage on a similar level. I used to enjoy those, and 9 times out of 10, actually, everyone would be chatting and would relax into it. There'd always be something I used to say this, right? Okay, what's going on? Why have you all got your arms crossed? You know,
yeah.
This is
just the elephant in the room.
This isn't the greatest welcome I've had. you know, bear in mind, I'm a member of staff as you are. Why have you all got your, you know, I just say it in a non-threatening way. Why have you all got your arms crossed? That's really negative body language. What's going on? Come on, talk to me. What's
Is there
up?
somebody behind me with a gun that I don't know about?
You know, and then someone would normally say something, and then you go, okay, well, actually, no, the reason behind that is blah, 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 blah. And then you can get into it. But I used to be one of the best parts of my job doing watch visits. Because you're finding out really what's going on, but also it's that sort of human connection. You know, I really loved being on a watch and still used to enjoy visiting watches. So you know, I'm not saying all of them were necessarily easy, but I certainly used to enjoy most of them.
You get it straight from the horse's mouth. Sometimes you get it. Not saying that others aren't honest, but sometimes you get the most honest stuff there. Sometimes we'll fumble our way through it because we don't quite know how to say it properly. But sometimes that's honest. And if we know you're not going to sack me because I go, look, Joe, that seemed like a really shit decision. You know, when I heard that, mate, I don't know you very well, and I say with respect, but I thought you were a bit of a dick when I saw that in the article, when I saw that in the thing. You know, so and so's good. I've got a lot of time for so and so, and the way I've heard you treated them wasn't very good. And then you'll be able to elaborate and give some color. Because I always say there's three sides to every story. You know, there's your version, there's my version, then there's the true version.
Yeah, I'd probably challenge you on saying bit of a dick, just because that's not.
I go, well, steady. Yeah, let's use appropriate language.
But yeah, come on. But at the same time, I'd be comfortable to say that's absolutely fine to say that you want to know more about that decision or you don't agree with it. Absolutely, that's all part of being safe to challenge. You know, that's no problem. No, what you know. So I think that's, you know, part and parcel of it. Normally on a watch or station visit, normally the first 10 minutes is sort of letting people talk and get their stuff out, you know, let them vent a bit, and then make notes and then go back in and get into the detail. You know,
what do you want to talk about rather than me waffling to you for half an hour about something you don't know anything about, you're not interested in.
And I'd often I'd often ask before I go on the watch, have you got any questions for me, so I can make sure I'm properly prepared? You know, is there anything you want to know about?
I love that, mate. I've never actually seen that. Or I've never received that email as a watchman.
So that's why you can be proactive. I'd say to your listeners, be proactive around that. If you've got a senior,
I always had a list of questions and a notebook. I was never asked, what do you want so and so to talk about?
Resend them, because what that means is you're going to get a much better answer. You know, that officer hopefully will then come armed with facts and figures to help, you know, articulate.
Because otherwise they end up going, I've not spoke to that area manager. I've not spoke to that. Let me take that away with me, when really you haven't given me the answer then.
Yeah. And that's right. And I used to have to do that sometimes. You know, if you don't have the answer, it's unfair to kind of, you know, just, but the main thing around that authentic leadership bit is you have to go back with an answer. You know, we used to have in fact, we brought in a system. So every watch visit that any senior manager did, immediately afterwards, you would type up the questions you got and who was going to answer them if you needed more information, and then you'd feed it directly back to the watch manager within a certain time frame. And that was just part of our process to make sure, because we'd learned from what happens when you
I think that's
people
great.
Don't trust you. Well, people don't trust you. Yeah. Authentic, because you're saying you're going to get back to them and you're not. So there's we put processes in, and I'm sure many other. But you know,
well, mate, with things like Office 365 now and those live Excel sheets, they're great. And I know people will laugh at me because they've been around for probably a decade, but you can all just pile stuff into it and update, and you know, and then you know, you haven't got to get lost in the old. Where's the email? Oh God, I've deleted that one. Is this the most recent one? Blah blah blah. You have an active thing. By who? By when? You know, who's dealing with this? You know, it's not like who's someone. Who's that? If I put that in the directory for the service, who is someone? Who's actually doing it? You know what I mean? Because otherwise it ain't getting done, is it?
No. And rightly, your senior managers aren't going to have all the answers they're going to generally know what's going on in their organization, but they're not going to know all the details, because you can't know every single bit about, this particular BA set, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'll find out for you. I'll have to speak to the person who's in charge of that, because I've been assured that they are.
You could probably find that out yourself as well. Yeah. Come on, have you emailed them yourself? You know what I mean? Sometimes you have to push back, don't you? Especially if it is a manager asking you that question. You're like, well, you know, you're a manager in the service, and I'm happy to go away and help and assist and stuff. But what have you done about this problem so far?
Yes, I would agree with you. I do think sometimes we have had a tendency to spoon feed a little bit. And I think, you know, interesting, you talked earlier about people coming in from other organisations. I think you don't see that as much perhaps in the private sector, where people are perhaps a bit more proactive around that sort of finding that.
Circle us back to rebel ideas and inclusion, because I promise I don't want to leave our listeners waiting if that bit we come back to.
So I'd say Black Box Thinking, really good book. We talked about that, but I think Rebel Ideas is the best book I've read, that, and I've used this on many of those watch visits. I've used this many times normally I just need a board and a pen to demonstrate that a particular model that Matthew Syed uses. Those who don't know Matthew Syed, look him up, but basically he's an ex-Olympian table tennis player who's now a psychologist and has many writes for the Times and various other things. But the way in which he describes inclusion, and he always uses really, really clear examples around learning, and basically, if you're all thinking the same and doing the same, you're never really going to change very well, or not. You're not going to have the right ideas. And the example he gives is the World Trade Center. Part of the reason that the World Trade Center, the planes hit the 9/11 attacks, and that they hadn't predicted it, was because all of the people that were in the particular team that were looking at that threat were all very similar. They were all white male, and they'd all were either at Harvard or Princeton. They'd been educated. So all their life experiences, although different, I'm not saying everybody had exactly the same life experiences, they were all quite similar. So they had all been, they were all from white middle-class families who had all been educated, and all were at very prestigious American universities. So guess what? There was no one in the team who was Muslim, no one who understood about, no one female, no one from various other backgrounds who might have had an opportunity to perhaps influence or predict some of those things that were happening. So if you can imagine, so how Matthew Syed describes sort of why inclusion is important, and why having different people making decisions, or part of that decision-making process and thought process in any organization is important, is if you can imagine a big box, a big square, and that's all your problems that you've got in your fire and rescue service at the moment. So now I'm going to draw a circle in the bottom left-hand corner, little circle. That's me, a white male, been in the fire service all my life. That's all my life experience. So my problem-solving capability for this big bit, what I'm bringing to the table, is in that circle. Let's take you now, Pete. Different backgrounds, different upbringings, but you're still a white male. You've had white male privilege. Your circles overlap mine a bit, and will be slightly different because you've got. But basically, unless there's something really different, you're going to have a similar sort of problem-solving capability to me, because you've had a similar background.
Yeah.
And if you look at the UK Fire and Rescue Service, it's probably still around 94-95% white male, probably. So yeah. Most of our circles are going to be overlapping in that bottom left corner. Okay. If we bring a woman now into that problem, her circle's going to overlap us slightly, but it's going to be different, because her life experiences are going to be completely different to mine and yours. Totally different. So they will open up different thought processes around that. If we bring someone in from another country, I don't know, someone who's Japanese, Chinese, culturally they've been brought up differently. Their circle's it's barely going to touch ours, because they've had something different. If we bring different religions in it, different sexual orientations, all of those life experiences and things that have got that person to where they are means
I think that's where some people sometimes think that we are just banging the female drum with women in the fire service and stuff like that. But when you do look at people like Dawn Whitaker, Sabrina Cohen and Anne Millington and stuff like that, it's not just because they're a woman, but in being a woman, they have had a very different and diverse, neural pathways. They've had different problems to solve, so they will look at things differently. It's one of those things. It's like, it's not just because they're a woman, but it's actually because their life experiences, and their life experiences are based over the umbrella of being a female. But that's no different, like you say, than the other different diverse upbringings and thinking pathways that people will have experienced in their own life. It just so happens that is the one overlap there.
Yeah, so you want people who are not the same as me. I don't want an echo chamber if I'm trying to solve a really complex problem. I'm not going to solve the problem. Not really.
But I think that's where we get diversity wrong, because what we're trying to do sometimes is we want people that look different but think the same. is what some people's interpretation of diversity is. They focus on race and religion and the color of your skin, and they're just trying to find people sometimes. And this is the pessimist, but also slightly the realist inside me. Sometimes when I see things, I'm like, you don't really want people that think differently, because I'm a freak from the middle of nowhere who starts a podcast that will get him sacked one day, thinks very differently. And I think that's been one of my biggest challenges in developing myself in the fire and rescue service.
So I'll go back to Matthew's side and the example he gives around, again, I guess brings this to life. So I'm a football fan. I've been a football fan all my life. England, for all my life, have never achieved, and actually, unfortunately, other than the women, we still the men's team still hasn't, but we've got much better. And actually, we're now in final semi, we're really definitely challenging. Now, about 10 years ago, Matthew Side was involved with working with the England team, who are basically saying, this isn't working. We are not achieving. We're not, there's something absolutely wrong with the whole structural setup of England. So what Matthew Side was brought in as a consultant, and he said, right, you need different people. You need someone from industry. You need someone from, various, you needed him for a start, who plays table tennis. So they got a load of people completely unconnected to sport to try and work through what some of the issues were.
Dave Brailsford's done something very similar.
Yeah, exactly. Same with the British cycling team. So what it was about was saying, if you bring just football people in to solve football problems, you're only as good as all your life experience, which would, guess what, are just in football. And for me, that was one of my biggest self-reflections in the fire service. I've only ever worked in the fire service. I don't know what good looks like anywhere else. So I've got to speak to other people and bring them into that influencing sort of sphere to say, right, what does good look like? So we many people now have set up, many services have got staff networks for different people. So we've had one for LGBTQ plus, had them
BAME, all of them,
women's groups, etc. But myself and the chick, we used to meet with them every. They had our own private number, so if any issues, they could always ring us. But also, we'd meet with them at least quarterly to actually just listen and to get in. So, and we'd sometimes come to them and go, "We're thinking about doing this. What do you think?" And often it would be, "Oh, but no, you need to consider this, or you need to consider this." So,
I think sometimes at the fire and rescue service, a bit like the Truman Show. Do you remember the Truman Show?
Yeah, I love Truman
Show. The Jim Carrey film. Because sometimes we're so far inside our own cult and our own unconscious bias that we don't even realize it exists anymore, because the boundary is so far away from where we are. We're so far in it, we don't realize we're even in it.
Yeah, I'm really encouraged by the NFCC's cultural plan, which is bringing in people. I really rate Mark Harding. I really like that they're now bringing in people from across various different sectors to help. That's what is really needed now.
Because what we don't realize is we're running multi-million-pound organizations, and people will think very coldly about that statement that I've just made. And that's not to say that it needs to all be about the metric, and we should do things that actually we know make a difference, but it's hard to measure, because sometimes not everything that is measurable needs doing, and not everything that needs doing is measurable, or whatever the quote goes, or something like that. But we do need to recognize that we need those skill sets. And this probably brings us on to the direct entry aspect. In fact, before we go there, just to close the loop on that, so that's Rebel Ideas, the power of diverse thinking. That's a Matthew Side book. Again, of course, I'm going to suggest people do the audio because that's how I like it. And I would say about the audio, he actually reads it himself. And he reads it himself with Black Box Thinking as well. And they're both great books. We will put the link for that in the notes as well. But is this a good place to step over to the aspect of direct entry and the value of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Have you got a question, or do you want me to just talk about it?
Well, I mean, direct entry in itself. So several things here. So the aspect of bringing people in at station manager and going upwards, do we think that's the right place to put them? The challenges and pushbacks that some of them may experience, and perhaps you could relate to that in transferring from one service to another, and people going, that's not how we do it, because I'm sure people coming in, I think, in fact, I've already had, because they ran the first day for the direct entry people, the NFCC, I think, ran it at the college a few months ago, from the people that have got through the first rounds. So I know we've had emails and messages from quite a few people that have said they're through this process and they've listened to the podcast because they're trying to get some sector knowledge and blah, blah, blah. So I'd be remiss if we didn't speak to them as well and say some of the challenges they're likely going to come into, because I'm sure they're very excited, but I'm sure they're not oblivious to the fact that they will get some pushback, and you've had some pushback moving from service to service. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is just to champion the value they're going to add, and then to speak to the people within our services who are perhaps concerned greatly about the fact these people are coming in, they're going to be in charge of incidents, and they're going to get someone killed.
Yeah, lots to unbox there, but I think so. I think you're kind of talking about the sort of culture eat strategy for breakfast, really, where you've got a great strategy, but is it actually going to work in practice? And I think those people who absolutely admire that, I think it's the right thing to do. I think something that I had liked to would have wanted to have done more in my career would have been to be seconded into other organisations to learn.
No, not doing a lot of it anymore, though, are we?
It's great. No, it's so hard at the moment.
Resource heavy.
It's
someone's got to do your job while you're not there.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to do. I think it shouldn't be a luxury, but I think it is. But that's okay. So I'm just reflecting back on. I think I'd have really got a lot out of that, because
I believe everyone would. I agree. Yeah.
And I did something different and had the experience somewhere else. The stuff I'd learned and want to bring back was all, I was like an excited Labrador, So I think that there's that bit that is definitely missing. So I think this is one of the direct entry stuff's a great way of bringing difference in, different life experiences, rather than and I'm putting myself in this box, rather than people who have been career firefighters, because we're very, I would say the ops stuff we, rightly should be absolutely up on, but perhaps there are gaps. I've been honest and said, I was put in charge of a program and project team without really knowing much about it. I had to learn from scratch and get mentoring and, learn that. Luckily, I employed some fantastic people who have taken it on and were great. But so I think having other knowledge from other sectors to bring in and make those real changes that we can't see, we don't know what these things are. We don't know what good looks like.
Honestly, sometimes you get to your level, or when you're at like the group or even the dep level or the area manager, you end up being in charge of subject matter experts that are non-operational. But a lot of the people that are in charge of them, like yourself in that place, were traditionally operational people. And the Green Book staff tend to support the Grey Book staff. And I can only imagine, and I've been spoke to a lot of them, had a lot of them on the podcast, some of the Green Book staff are banging their heads against a wall when they're screaming into the void of someone who is operationally focused and cannot understand what that person is trying to get across and the importance of it.
Yeah, so I've had this conversation with a few Green Book staff myself when they've said, but why, I've always allowed people to open this, why are you the director of people? Why haven't we got a director of people who's been through all of the HR qualifications and blah, blah, blah. And unfortunately, the answer is because you have to have, under the Civil Contingencies Act, we have to have a rota of senior officers that at any time can go to an SCG, TCG and have those operational requirements. We don't, most FRSs, in fact, very few FRSs have the luxury to be able to have senior ranks who can do the operational bit.
You've got to be massive metropolitan, haven't you? I mean, we just had a guy called Apollo from London Fire Brigade. He's the head of their data. Really knowledgeable, fascinating guy. But he's got like 15 people in his team. Now, you're never going to get that in any other service because they're just ain't big enough.
Well, you can't afford it. So, unfortunately, what that means is senior managers who are fire service based and are operational based you have to run teams who are Green Book and you don't know much about. But that's why I go back to that. You have to be more of a conductor and trust and create the right environment for those people to thrive and to be able to get you on board as quickly as possible. And
you've got to get comfortable with the fact that you haven't got the answer.
Yes, you have. Yeah,
they've got the answer.
Yeah. And that's where a lot of when you first get that sort of area manager, group manager, area manager job is where it feels like you've been hit over the head because of the amount of stuff you've got to learn very, very, very quickly. But going back to the sort of direct entry bit, that I think we are culturally, I do think those people are going to have challenges. I think they probably understand that, because they haven't been through the same process that others have. And there is some organisational risk from an incident bit there. I think we're looking at, the various inquiries that have come out, Grenfell, Manchester Arena, and there'll be others. Operational competence is huge. The business that I've now built is all around helping senior managers maintain their operational competence because of part of that massive risk.
Are you going to be able to do any? I know I'm getting into perhaps a personal, professional conversation there, and feel free, we can edit this out. Would you be interested in supporting some of that direct entry stuff? Because they will need. So at the moment, they've got a whole accelerated growth plan in place already, but they will need some subject matter experts, either as mentors, coaches, instructors. There's a big development pathway for these people.
I think it's critical, and of course, I'd be very, very, very happy to get involved in any way. I think the station manager area is probably going to be quite, there's a lot to learn there, and I think anyone
they'll get the biggest pushback as well, because they'll be managing people who look at them with distrust sometimes, which is really a shame. And I'm just saying the honest truth, because there are some very old school thinking, romantic firefighters, traditionalists, purists, who just don't have the cultural maturity and emotional intelligence in maybe even some of these bigger metropolitan services, the way some of them might get treated. I'm worried for them.
I hope that they've got all the right support structures in place, and they are, they're working together. And I'm not involved,
because it'll be a failure of all of us if they aren't.
So I would expect that it will be a bit of a challenge to start with. I'm sure it'll be hugely rewarding, but the bit that the services have got to get right is to make sure that they're fully supported and are given the right development opportunities to ensure that they are safe and competent.
Because otherwise, they'll just go straight back out, and they will tell everybody that what you read in the cultural review is true. And I went in and I did my direct entry and I was treated horribly. And that is not what we want to see, because that will be a very small few that will spoil it for all the great people doing a lot of this great work.
And also, not just from a reputational point of view, but the fire and rescue service, unless we bring different people in who think differently, we're not going to evolve. We're not going to move into
absolutely
that we need to do. Services just aren't going to get to where they should be actualizing. So there is a risk. I think area manager is slightly different, but again, I think there's been successful. This chief officer, Dawn's one of them, who's come over and is working at strategic level. It's different. SCG level 4 sort of command, so SCG command is different to the others. It is a different beast, but you do need to, part of the assessment qualification under ESFM 1, which is part of the acquisition and the redevelopment sort of national operational standard for senior managers. You do have to evaluate the plan and be clear that you're comfortable with it and mitigate, so you do need a really good understanding of, you don't need to know how a BA set works, but you do need to understand around the kind of key risks at an incident and all of those factors, and be comfortable that the command structure's in place, and to be,
because I know, like Dawn Whitaker as an example, when we had her on, she actually did choose then to go back and do, I think, like an 8 or 12 week firefighter course. But you shouldn't have to do that, and it's wonderful, and I love her for doing that. But it's not realistic, and you shouldn't have to do that to get the respect of people, because, like you say, it doesn't bloody matter. You don't need to do a bloody general check. You're never going to be part of a safe working at height setup, are you?
Yeah, no, you're not. And as a senior manager, you go to a thing and you'd be asked a technical question around a BA set or something. I don't know. I haven't touched a BA set for years, but I can tell you. But I can tell you what happens when a BA emergency is instigated, for example. So it's those sort.
I can tell you exactly where to go to get the policy, and I will execute that to the T. Yeah.
So I think it's about people, but there's an education piece here. There's a massive education piece for those people in service to understand why it's being done. And I hope that's being done. I'm assuming it is. All brigades will be different. I think the big piece is the education piece, and for people to understand that the fire sector is evolving. So yes, fully support it. But I think for those people, I suspect to start with, it might be a bit of a tricky ride. I hope after a few years, as things change, with any new process, there's always going to be things you haven't thought of or improvements that you're going to want to make. So, but what I'm with you, Pete. I really hope it works, and I really hope that it doesn't. You get people that are, for any reason, find it really challenging, and it adds to that sort of unhelpful sort of reputation sometimes that we get as a sector.
Joe, what I want to do now, because we've gone for 2 hours straight, which is awesome. I know there's things I really wanted to ask you around some of the work you did with the availability duty system with Devon and Somerset, some of the on-call stuff. We've not even begun really to go into the depths of incident command, some of the climate change and the wildfire stuff. So what I'm going to ask is that we pin them into the board for what I'd love to have as a follow-up conversation, because I think, I personally, and obviously we're recording this, so tell me afterwards if you feel differently, or tell me now. I've absolutely loved our conversation. I feel like we've gone in some fantastic areas there. So I'd probably love to put into the notes for a follow-up discussion if you'd be up for it.
Absolutely. More than happy to. Yep.
Beautiful, mate. Because there's so much stuff that we've not, but the generosity that you've given, I think there's so much valuable stuff there. And I'd encourage people to go back and listen again, because in the notes for this, because we never actually do this, or we're very poor at doing it, but we are going to, because I've documented them down as I've done it. We've got Switch, we've got, I say, the Dan and Chip Heath, we've got Decisive in there, Black Box Thinking, Innovation Central, we're going to put a link in there for them, and Millington. I think it'd be great for people to go and have a little bit more of a look at. There is actually a free Rebel Ideas book on Google Books, so people haven't actually got to purchase that at all. So I'm going to drop a link for that as well, and we'll also put Rebel Ideas, The Power of Diverse Thinking, for people to go and get the audio for them as well. Are there any closing points in relation to the things we've discussed today that you would love to leave with our listener to marinate in their mind, or any asks or requests or directions? And of course, we'll encourage people to head over and check out joehassellcommand.co.uk, and we'll link that in the notes as well for people that wish to contact you yourself. But is there anything you'd love to leave the listener with before we wrap it up?
I suppose if I can speak to your individual listeners, those who are still involved in the fire service, those who are probably on watches and on call stations and others, I think just going back to that inclusion piece, I think everybody has that. I think if you really want change in the fire and rescue service, it has to be done on an individual level. We can do these I've talked a lot today about change processes and various things that have helped me sort of navigate that change. But actually, it all boils down to individuals on stations and watches being responsible themselves and challenging the status quo, and actually, driving that improvement themselves. It's all very well your organisation trying to do it, but actually the real power, I'll give you one quick example. Watch manager, real, lovely guy in Plymouth, one of our watch managers' daughter challenged him on white privilege, and he got really defensive about it. She was doing her degree on it and was very defensive about it, and then he just listened to her, and after about them talking it through for about 3 hours, he realized that he completely understood what white privilege meant, and actually what that had meant, that others don't have that. And on the back of that, him and his daughter started doing presentations. They asked us first, they gave the presented to the senior management team. We went, fantastic, brilliant, it's made me think about things differently, and all of us. And so they started, him and his daughter, going to watches and just having those conversations, because something had changed in him that he thought, I can influence something here. So I suppose what I'm saying is anyone listening to this can influence change positively if it's something that you're passionate about. So I think I'll probably leave it there.
The Firefighters Podcast was created to recognize, acknowledge, inspire, and hopefully even motivate these incredible individuals who have chosen to be part of the first responder community. Our drive and purpose is to create a legacy resource for the current and future generations of firefighters and first responders. We get some incredible feedback from listeners and guests, and as the podcast grows, our desire to create longevity and sustainability means we are asking for the support of our listeners. If you want to support the podcast, if you want to get discounts to our merchandise, hoodies, clothing, coins, patches, tally tallies, and also access to all of the incredible documents get shared with us from our podcast guests and sector leaders, then please head over to our Patreon page, and for just £3 a month, you can support the future of the podcast. Please finally hit that follow, subscribe, or rate button on the platform you're listening, and wherever you're in the world, please support your emergency services responders, and thank you for listening.